Saul asked me to give an overview of the process in terms of the creation of the Coastal Liaison Group in Fingal and the work of the group, and to focus really on sort of maybe the good and the bad aspects of that. So Fingal, as you've have been seen from the previous presentations, is just north. It's the non-metropolitan area of the county of Dublin, north of the River Liffey. So it's outside of the city limits, if you like, and it's largely a rural hinterland with coastline and sort of a significant number of coastal communities. And the area we're going to focus on here is the Rogerstown estuary, which I've highlighted there. Although the Coastal Liaison Group has a remit right up and down along the entire coastline in the county. And we'll be looking at the Portrane Peninsula and the borough, locally called the Borough Peninsula, and just put that green infrastructure plan up for you, just to highlight the number of designations that apply to the estuary and this part of the coastline. Yeah, so that's the that's the Borough Peninsula I mentioned in the Rogerstown estuary, and the areas north and south of the estuary where we are going to focus some of the attention of the presentation. And to the west there, you'll see a sort of a roughly triangle shaped site which is adjoining a railway line, which is also relevant in relation to this. You'll understand that in a little while. But that's the sort of projected scenario in terms of erosion for the Borough Peninsula over the next 100 years, based on different levels of I suppose climate change or sea level increase. So it's not a pretty picture and very concerning for the local population. There's over 200 houses on the peninsula. But in late 2015, there was a series of very serious, a number of very serious storms, and there was a significant amount of erosion over a very short period of time. So that had been happening sporadically over a number of years, but there was a very concentrated number of events, and there was a huge furore in the local press in particular, and it went sort of national a bit as well. So the chief executive said something has to be done, and I suppose we'd been responding to the local community here and in other locations saying, well, the council's remit is very limited, and the its agency in relation to this is very minor, and the legislative framework within which we can operate is itself very limited. So we were at a loss to know sort of how we could best approach it, because we were just sort of saying, unless there's sort of a piece of road infrastructure or rail infrastructure or some civic infrastructure affected, it's not really a matter for the local authority per se, because we don't have a remit to protect private property in Ireland. There's no legislative framework for any agency protecting private property from coastal erosion. Nevertheless, we're the situation where there's a number of houses very particularly affected and immediately affected. So a group of us in the council were sort of brought into to consider how best we might respond in the circumstances, given the limited remit of the council. And there was a sort of an analogue for it with this area, which I showed you earlier on, which is a former landfill from the 1970s called Ballylee Landfill. And I was a member I am still a member of a liaison group that works with the community about the closure and adaptation plan for this landfill. It's a 50-hectare site, which we're repurposing as a very significant regional park for this part of the coastline, and it adjoins the the special area conservation, the Rogerstown estuary. So I suggested that we sort of replicate this process for the entire estuary with a separate for the entire coastline of the county, with the formation of a coastal liaison group, which would have a remit around responding to ongoing concerns in relation to coastal erosion and coastal flooding. You know, notwithstanding the fact that there was such limited legislative framework, and certainly very limited remit specifically for the local authority. And just this was the sort of the terms of reference we came up with, and then the membership was agreed with the local elected members that there would be a significant number of elected members from the wards in the county adjoining the coastline. And then added to that, we would community representatives representing specific community groups along the coastline, and then a number of council officials. So I've been chair of the Coastal Liaison Group since 2016, because it was formed, as I say, in response to this very concentrated number of events in late 2015. So we've been meeting every couple of months since then, and we've been sort of trying to address specific issues of concern to local communities, and added to that, sort of lobbying or promoting an approach to dealing with the overall legislative lacuna or gap, the sort of the lack of legislative framework for addressing coastal erosion as it affects communities. So they're just some more of the terms of reference of the liaison group there. And we wanted to really give it quite a wide remit. It's a really a way for us to sort of work with the community, as opposed to constantly being in a defensive mode and saying, well, this is why we're not doing this. We're saying this, let's look collectively at what we can do, and let's understand the issue better together, and then use that as to approach central government or other agencies such as the Office of Public Works or the National Parks and Wildlife Service, so that we're coming with a shared understanding and a united approach with the local communities in terms of what's best for those communities. And then just some additional sort of remit of the group, if you like. But this is just, so very quickly, we sort of focused in on the immediate issue, and with the community groups from the other parts of the county, we focused in on the issue in Portrane and in the Rogerstown estuary. And within a number of months, we were sort of we had engaged with the relevant minister, and you know, a number of other local politicians became very interested and engaged with the issue, and specifically we were able to sort of leverage that in terms of getting short-term measures implemented along the most vulnerable part of the coastline in Portrane. So we've put in place an intermediate sort of interim solution with these concrete CBs, just really to buy ourselves time in relation to the issue. But the liaison group and our engagement with the group was very instrumental in, I suppose, securing the funding for that, and in terms of the political support for it, because we were able to demonstrate that we had you know, a good level of consensus with the community and with the elected members around what should happen. And that's progressed now. Sorry, that's progressed now to the longer term solution. Sorry, those are our activated slides. So we've a longer term solution now at Portrane with the installation of what we call fishtail groins and beach nourishment. Now, there's been a lot of debate about this, the appropriateness of it. Is coastal retreat a more appropriate response here? There's no, as I said earlier, there's no framework for a legislative framework for approaches like coastal retreat, which arguably may be more appropriate, but there is a legislative framework to do things like this, notwithstanding the constraints in relation to the designations that apply to the site. Just to say then that we've sort of just gone through a whole public information process around this, where we've been very working very closely with the Coastal Liaison Group, who've been sort of encouraging other parts of the community to input into the consultation process on this. And we've got a sort of 500 submissions in relation to this proposal, and we're now at the stage where we're looking at the very specific planning requirements around this project. But I suppose it's just to be very clear, it's not a perfect solution. You're ultimately appealing to people who are amenable to this approach of engagement, who I suppose are able to give the time that it requires, and that are I suppose willing to suspend their sort of their natural sort of concerns around the issue to actually try and participate in progressing the debate. But allied to this, then we have we have progressed the sort of policy side of things. I would like to think that the lobbying from the council, with the support of the Coastal Liaison Group, got an item included on the programme for government, and there has been a working group formed to address the legislative issue, and that's Fingal is represented on that working group. So hopefully that will ultimately result in some improvement in terms of the legislative framework for dealing with coastal erosion in the country. We also sponsored an audit of coastal erosion around the entire coastline of Ireland, and that's going to be important in informing how the government, I suppose, responds. And we hope it will be instrumental in informing how the government responds to coastal erosion. But I just finish up now just to say that we see this, we need to change, I suppose, the dynamic in relation to the approach to coastal erosion, that it sits within an overall climate change policy, which in turn informs practice, which in turn informs planning, and then the results, good and bad from that, again inform policy, and you get hopefully a circle of virtue in relation to the ultimately the approach to this very intractable issue. So finish there.